Welcome everyone to the Diversity Officer and Indispensable Leadership Role in Academic Neurology. The AAN's Diversity Officer Workgroup, is pleased to present this today, and we want to let you know it is being recorded, so you will have a chance to watch this later as well. So as we begin, just some tips for today's webinar. If you do have a question, please submit that using the Q&A button. We will use the chat button for any technical problems such as sound and video, and we can respond. You'll also have a chance to ask questions at the end of the webinar during the panel discussion. And we also have a post-webinar survey for you to complete. So before we begin, we also would like to know who is in the audience today. So I'm going to begin a brief poll. We'd like you to fill out, it's just a couple of questions. So please let us know your training level and then if you are currently a diversity officer. Now we have some votes coming in. And we are about at 80% completed. Okay, so I'm going to share the results here. So this is going to just help our diversity officer work group know how to speak to the content and know who is attending. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Dr. Nimish Mohile. He is a co-chair of the work group, and I'm going to turn it over to him.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We've got a really exciting panel today with some great discussion about the role of a diversity in an academic neurology department and how do we really make that role thrive. Next slide, please. I want to start by talking a little bit about our work group. Our work group was commissioned by the AAN about 3 years ago, and at the time we set aside some missions. We really focused on how we could help diversity officers develop in academic neurology departments. We wanted to assess the needs of diversity officers and provide resources to support their roles. We wanted to strengthen inclusion, diversity, equity, anti-racism, and social justice in the culture and structures of academic neurology departments. And we really wanted to engage the American Academy of Neurology in creating a real home for neurology diversity officers. Next slide, please. This is our panel, and you'll see every one of them on today, and they'll be introduced as they speak, but just a shout out to all of them. Next slide. And I want to highlight a paper that we put together collaboratively that was just published in January of this year in Neurology. And it really aims to give a roadmap both to diversity officers on what kinds of roles they can play in an academic department, but also to departmental leaders on why they might need a diversity officer and how they can best support them. So I hope you can look at this as a resource for how you can incorporate this role into your own departments. Next slide. And then we've got some future ideas, and we also at the end will want your input on other things that we can do to help and support you. We're thinking of some webinars related to practices for inclusive faculty recruitment. How do we better address gender inequities in academic leadership? Can we rethink resident and recruitment and selection from a holistic lens? And what can we do to strengthen the pipeline? We're also working on some manuscripts looking at system changes in academic neurology departments and some tactics and strategies for diversity officers in these roles. And ultimately, we'd like to build a real diversity officers consortium at the AAN. And our hope would be that in the spring of 2022 at an in-person annual meeting, that we could have a meeting where we could collectively meet and share best practices together. Next slide, please. And so our agenda today is going to be three main questions. The first question is the diversity officer. Why do we need one? And this is, our panel is going to be Dr. Marulanda and Dr. Mejia. Next slide. Our second question is the role of the diversity officer as an advocate and agent of change. And here our panelists are going to be Dr. Ebong and Dr. Flippen. Next slide. And then the final question, what does a diversity officer need to be successful? And this will be with panelists Dr. Hamilton and Dr. Spector. Next slide. I want to put in a plug for the AAN annual meeting. We have a lot of activities going on this year that are really focused on inclusion, diversity, and equity. It includes scientific sessions looking at the neurologic consequences of racism. It includes sessions on health disparities, and includes some really practical work on how we can better engage these issues in academic neurology departments. We'll be sending out to all of the attendees a list of all of the sessions going on so that you can mark them on your calendar. Next slide. And now it's time to get started. So I'm going to introduce our moderator for today's discussion, and that's Dr. Rena Thomas from Stanford University School of Medicine.
Thank you very much. And welcome to all of our over 115 participants joining us today. We really have a lot of content to cover today during this webinar, and experts from various different practices across the country that are each members of our working group. And the first pair of panelists that I would like to welcome to the stage is Dr. Erica Marulanda Londoño and Dr. DeMejia. And I would like, if you can, please start by introducing yourselves as well as your role at your home institutions. We'll be discussing the topic of the diversity officer. Why do we need one?
Sure. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Erica Marulanda. I am part of the Diversity Officer, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee at the University of Miami, Miller School of Medicine, Department of Neurology.
It's a pleasure to be here together with all of you. My name is DeMejia. I'm a movement disorder specialist at Mass General Neurology, and I've been leading our community health, diversity, and inclusion efforts since 2011.
And if you could please first discuss the diversity and equity issues in the neurology workforce and those that affect patient care.
Sure. So I think, this has been looked at a lot in the past couple of years. And as part of our, when I participated in the diversity leadership program, I think Roy Hamilton coined a term called neurodisparity, essentially, which is how disparity in healthcare applies specifically to neurologic disease. And we know that even though neurology has come a long way, it used to be thought of as a specialty where we don't have a lot to do and we just kind of sit and watch our patients worsen over time. That is not the case anymore. But even though we have so many new treatments, we do know that there are very significant inequities in the level of access that patients have to care, how they utilize these resources, and unfortunately in their outcomes. And a lot of work has gone into determining what are the factors that play a role in this. And part of it is that, that there is some there is an issue with the representation of the providers that take care of the patients. And so there's a lot of evidence in different fields of medicine, for example, in OB-GYN, medicine in internal medicine, that when the providers look like the patients that they take care of, patients have better outcomes. I don't think this has been looked at so much specifically in neurology, but I think it definitely plays a role. And I think that's part of the answer to the question overall of how to improve patient care. We can't always have a situation where the provider is of the same cultural background as the patient, but I think that when you have providers overall in the field of neurology that are more culturally diverse, come from backgrounds that are more diverse, the culture of neurology, the culture of the neurologist changes overall. And I think patient care improves overall. And ultimately, we will get to a place where care is more equitable and outcomes are more equitable for all patients. And I think that's a big part in where the diversity officer comes in. And I think that's kind of the root of your question. So I think in part to fix the disparity, the neurodisparity that exists, the diversity officer plays a huge role. Even though in an academic department, the main role of a diversity officer is to reduce this inequity and discrimination that occurs in academia, I think a secondary downstream effect is the effect on patient care. I think in most institutions, the focus is not directly on patient care, but in serving the staff, the faculty, and the trainees, and looking at the issues that affect those people within the department. But the downstream effects are significant. Then the other roles are to ensure that the people that are in the department that are coming through the neurology pipeline eventually come to represent what the rest of the nation looks like. So for example, I'm not sure how many of you guys got to read the paper that came out of our work group, but we know that the neurologists in the US are not representative of the rest of the US population. So for example, 70% of US neurologists are white, 7% are Latino, and 2.8% are African American. That is really disproportionate to the US population. The US population is 20% Latino and about 13% African American. We know that about only 1/3 of US neurologists are women, and we don't even have an estimate about how many are LGBT. So if you think about serving our communities and understanding the backgrounds of our patients, there's really not necessarily a great understanding or a great representation of the backgrounds of the patients that we serve. Sorry, Nick, I'll give you a chance.
Yes, Dr. Mejia, can you share with us why we need this role in a clinical department like neurology, and what this individual might add to the institution, how it might complement the needs of an academic institution?
Yes, and I wanted to emphasize that, neurological disorders around the world are the leading cause of disability and one of the top causes of premature death. And, as Dr. Marulanda explained, there is extensive documentation of disparities, whether it's delayed diagnosis, subpar care, and at the end of the day, worse outcomes for people who we are leaving behind. And as neurologists, as a neurology field, we have an obligation to combat structural racism and really improve access to neurology care and improve the quality of the care we provide with equity. And so, there is an important role in having a person, a leader within academic institutions and within academic neurology departments to lead efforts related to equity and justice, to focus on diversity and inclusion. And I think the reasons are several. One is there has to be someone with knowledge and expertise related to equity, diversity, and inclusion. In my journey, I've had the opportunity to participate in courses, including the AAN Diversity Leadership Program and other formal training programs to learn the skills that go along with leading this type of work. So you need someone who has the interest and can dedicate the time to learning about this. Two, and very important, this work requires partnerships, and it requires partnerships with people outside of neurology departments and within neurology departments. So it requires that the person leading the efforts has meaningful time, protected time to engage with others at the hospital. For example, people leading disability services, people leading interpreter services, people leading community engagement. Oftentimes hospitals and academic medical institutions have a diversity office that then the department engages with to align with the work and have better synergies. And then internally, whether it's the residency program hoping to broaden, attract a more diverse set of applicants, recruit, retain, advance trainees, and then faculty development people also doing the same. The research world, the clinical and quality world. Within neurology, there's all these different pockets of a department that all intersect with equity, diversity, and inclusion. So you do need that person who faces inward and outward and partners with others to move the work more effectively.
Thank you very much. Was there another comment you wanted to make, Dr. Marulanda?
I was just going to say that I do think it's important for there to be a specific person for each department and not just at an institutional level. I know that some institutions rely on one person kind of overseeing all of their academic departments. And I don't necessarily think that that does the job, because I think that there may be department specific issues, like Nikte was saying, that need to be looked at. You know, there are many aspects, as we'll talk about, in the role of a diversity officer. And if that person has to oversee many different departments, then the job is going to get diluted. So for example, they need to look at hiring practices, they need to look at payment, you know, they need to look at education of their trainees. And so it's a lot of different aspects that are very specific to the department. And it's honestly too big and too important of a job to give to someone at such an overview level. So I do really think it's important to have each department at an institution have one diversity officer, and then those people can work together and maybe kind of as in a coalition, give each other ideas, say what's working for your department, what's not working, and then as a group really report to one person at the higher level of the institution. But really, I think it's crucial for each department to have a person that's looking at their internal needs.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I want to transition to our next question and looking at the discussion point of the diversity officer as an advocate and agent for change. And I wanted to welcome Dr. Ima Ebong and Dr. Charles Flippen to introduce themselves for the audience.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ima Ebong. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky Department of Neurology, and I specialize in clinical neurophysiology. I'm also my department's director of diversity and inclusion. And thank you for joining us today. Charles, if you're muted.
Sorry. Someone had to do that. I am Charles Flippen. I am a headache medicine subspecialist. I'm residency program director and chair of the neurology department EDI committee at the UCLA School of Medicine. And I'm happy to be here today and to share with you.
Thank you very much. And for this section of our conversation, we wanted to focus on changing policies and structures as it pertains to residency, recruitment, selection, faculty hiring, and leveraging the role of the diversity officer in both of these roles. Dr. Flippen, can you share a little bit about how you have seen the diversity officer being a key agent for change in both of these realms?
So, I think that, thank you, Dr. Thomas, but I think that, what Dr. Mejia said earlier about working with others is basically the core of a diversity officer's role. And as I mentioned in my introduction, I'm the chair of a diversity committee. So we took a different tack in our department, in part because we wanted to bring in all of those disparate voices within our department in order to have them help inform how we will go about integrating EDI issues throughout every activity of the department. I'm also a residency program director. I have a sort of a very core grounding in education and how I approach EDI work. Ideally, a diversity officer is going to be really closely attached to the education mission of an academic department, because that is the lifeblood, and that's how change is going to occur. It's going to occur with the younger people, with each generation of neurologists that's produced. That's where we're going to really affect change. So that involves partnership with the training program director, the fellowship program directors, the clerkship director. All of those people are going to be essential contacts for a diversity officer. The diversity officer should have that skill set that Dr. Mejia also referenced, having had time to learn the language of EDI, the techniques that have been successful in the past, and be able to create ideas that fit with the culture of the department that they're in. So I just listed here a couple of things. Excuse PowerPoint, but I'm of a generation that we still think linearly. So this is why you have a PowerPoint. Partnerships are important. Things that a diversity officer can aid the education apparatus of the department in doing: developing curriculum redesign, integrating justice, equity, diversity, inclusion issues within the curriculum of the clerkship, the residency program, fellowship programs. Issues such as care disparities, the role of a physician as a physician citizen, which is a concept that I really take to heart, advocacy, and understanding and learning cultural humility. So that we're in a growth mode all the time, that our trainees, as they go forward in their careers, are in a growth mode in understanding the communities and the people around them. When you talk about policy development and revisions, I know that we're looking at a restorative justice paradigm in our department for adjudicating disputes when people feel that they have been offended, as a model for how to do this in a just fashion. Working with training programs on application review and scoring and ranking that's done in a holistic manner. And also developing scorecards so that you can make constant monitoring of your progress, and then the iterative process of making adjustments when needed, when you see that you're not being effective in certain areas. Next slide. You have to have your chair's ear, okay? Not only the chair's ear, but also the chair's pocketbook. So when we talk about training people, teaching students, ultimately, they're gonna hopefully be your faculty, or at least a good percentage of them will be your faculty, so that when it comes time for recruitments, and not just recruitment, but also retention, which is something that I think we find people forget about. You can't just bring people through the door. You have to make them feel welcome, and you have to create the environment in which they're going to be able to develop. And so again, resource sharing with the chair and with whoever's over the advancements and promotions, appointments and promotions committee, the faculty development items along the same lines as what I mentioned for trainees and students, but also mentoring and informing faculty and giving them tools so that they can be effective mentors for all junior faculty, but in particular for those who come from underrepresented groups. And again, when you talk about policy development and revision, making certain that the diversity officer is at the table when the department does strategic planning, so that those issues are part of the department's strategic plan, and that they end up on the department's strategic plan scorecard. That way they don't fall by the wayside, and they're not set aside. They're part of the DNA of where the department's trying to go and how they're going to get there. Again, restorative justice for faculty disputes is a good model. Making certain that in the promotions process, that people are given credit for EDI work if they're doing it. And that it is not a unrecognized tax on the people who take these issues to heart, and that they get recognition for them in the same way that they do for their other professional activities. And again, scorecards, and not just for faculty members, but also for the chair, division chiefs, administrators as well. Are they promoting the activities that are necessary in order to really make effective change in the culture of the department?
Thank you so much. No, thank you so much. And that was a fantastic review of the policies and structures that are really key to seeing this change move forward. Dr. Ibong, you have been an instrumental leader at University of Kentucky in the education space, in raising awareness around issues of anti-racism training, bias training, but also external community engagement through social media and other outlets for the academy. Can you share a bit about both topics?
Sure. So I can start off with the community engagement. Earlier in the introduction, it was mentioned that many of us were a part, or at least all of us were a part of one of the AAN's leadership programs. And as you know, Dr. Thomas, you and I were both in the AAN Diversity Leadership Program class of 2019. And all of us during that leadership program were encouraged to leave our footprint on social media. And that's how I got started with Twitter, is actually through my involvement with AAN, particularly the leadership program. And I use it as a platform, not only to promote myself as a neurologist in my career, but also to make sure that I advocate for change, whether it be change in curriculum in various departments, including our own here at the University of Kentucky. I advocate healthcare for our patients, especially those who are underrepresented and underserved. And I also advocate for future neurologists. I think that we can all use social media to become virtual mentors to neurologists, as well as mentors to each other. I think that my computer. I think that we all can use social media to help promote one another and to help promote our field, neurology. I think that we saw an explosion of neurologists on social media, particularly in the last 2 years and particularly in the last 1 year. As you all know, last year was the Great Awakening. Not only were we in a pandemic and continue to be in a pandemic that highlighted the disparities in healthcare, particularly in Black and Brown people, we also had this social awakening. We saw the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, who was an alumna of the University of Kentucky and was a citizen of Louisville, Kentucky, Ahmaud Arbery, and others. We saw what happened in Minnesota, where our headquarters are. We saw that what the AAN did, as our leaders put out a statement condemning racism in this country. And so one thing that I learned last year is that we have to be more than just a few hashtags. We have to do more than just statements. We have to do more than just photographs. And so our Diversity Inclusion Committee met with the Education Committee. Dr. Flippen mentioned how the diversity officer has to work hand in hand with the education officers and leadership in the departments. We all met and we decided that we have to teach this. Those who, what's the quote? Those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And so I always think about that when I think about why it's important to have history of medicine as part of an education curriculum, and not just at the undergraduate level, but also at the graduate level. As neurologists, we tend not to learn that. I know I didn't learn any of this history while I was in my training. I learned it on my own, and I think most people are learning it on their own. Excuse me, I'm in a meeting. Sorry, it's 5 o'clock here, and the janitorial staff are knocking on the door. What was I saying? Where did I stop?
Importance of history.
Yes, the importance of history in medicine. We can't repeat it. So why, as a neurologist, this is important for us is because we know there are disparities in our field. We know from work from people such as Dr. DeMejia, who's on this panel, that there are disparities in stroke, epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, you name it. We see racial, ethnic, as well as socioeconomic disparities, but we have to know the reasons why we have those disparities, whether it be the history of experimentation of Black people in this country. I didn't know a lot of this when I was just in training, but now we have the opportunity to teach future neurologists, future physicians, because in our program, the medical students are invited to take part in the curriculum, the residents, faculty, staff, teach them so they don't repeat these things. And I think that if all programs develop anti-racism and social justice curriculum, and if we advocate to ABPN to make sure it's included in the teaching, we will in the future have better, well-rounded neurologists and do our part to eliminate those healthcare disparities that we see in our field.
Thank you so much. I wanted to also touch on the subject of how to best leverage affinity groups at our home institutions, such as the Latino Medical Student Association, SNMA, SIGN, White Coats for Black Lives, Bing Gap community. How have you interfaced with any of the affinity groups at the med school?
So I'm actually, oh, sorry. I was gonna say, I'm actually the faculty advisor for Student National Medical Association, a chapter here at the University of Kentucky. And I enjoy that role. I think it's a very important role because it keeps me in tune to what's going on in the undergraduate medical campus. Shameless plug, I always send them anything related to neurology. So students, I think they get more neurology than any of the other fields, but because I'm invested in their overall education, but also invested in increasing the number of underrepresented neurologists. So I think that it's important for me to be part of that group. But also you had mentioned other like groups such as BINYAP and also LMSA. We don't have those chapters here at the University of Kentucky, but I know that those are, those chapters and other medical schools are very influential in bringing about change in medical education to their respective campuses, similarly to what SNMA does. And I do think that AAN needs to partner with these programs. These can offer pipelines into neurology. And I think that not only partner, but definitely offer opportunities for students to be more involved within AAN. Specifically, I think you have to really target underrepresented students in order to increase the number of underrepresented neurologists in our field.
So I would just say that you know, what we do is usually not just at the local level. Last weekend I attended the National LMSA conference. Our GME office is really forward leaning in making certain that we have a presence at national conferences. We also go to their regional conferences, both LMSA and SNMA. So you know, those groups are very important. They also help us to publicize a visiting clerkship that we sponsor in our department for underrepresented students from underrepresented groups in neurology, so that they you know, particularly schools that don't have neurology as a required clerkship, it's an excellent opportunity for them to see the field, but also to see, you know, shameless plug, UCLA also. So those those contacts are very important, but also reaching down into the undergraduate campus and being available to the affinity groups for pre-medical students. And that's something else that we are active in. There's both a pre-med organization for students of color at UCLA, but also STEM students. So more of those leaning toward the basic sciences and engineering. And I always think you can, once you show people in basic sciences, what can be done with that knowledge applied to people, we can seduce a field and go into medicine as well as get their PhD. So, I think all of those are very important in developing a robust pipeline into our specialty. And just another comment, that the understanding the history of the various communities that make up our country is important, because if you don't know that history, you don't understand why people are coming to you in the place that they are, and understanding some of the factors that lead to vaccination hesitancy, understanding communication barriers that may exist. You have to understand what people, what their walk has been through life, what their families' walk has been through life, in order to be able to effectively communicate and understand the things that we need to change so that everyone feels like the door is wide open.
Thank you very much. I think that those were all really important points that you have each highlighted. I really appreciate that conversation. Next, I wanted to transition to our last pair of panelists on the topic of what does a diversity officer need to be successful. We have two fantastic panelists and speakers, Dr. Roy Hamilton and Dr. Andrew Spector. If you could each introduce yourselves and your roles at your home institutions.
Sure. My name is Dr. Roy Hamilton. I'm a behavioral neurologist, and I am the vice chair of inclusion and diversity at the University of Pennsylvania, where I'm also the assistant dean for cultural affairs and diversity in the Perelman School of Medicine, and co-chair of the Diversity Officers Workgroup.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Spector, and I'm an associate professor at Duke University. In the Department of Neurology, I'm a sleep medicine specialist, and I serve as the vice chair for inclusion, diversity, and empowerment. I'm also the associate program director for the residency and the sleep medicine fellowship director.
Thank you. And we wanted to focus on the importance of the various different skills that a diversity officer needs to be successful, as well as the allyship and interdepartmental collaboration required to do this work effectively. Can each of you speak on those topics, please?
Sure, I'll talk about some of the skills that it takes to be successful in the job. And the roles that Dr. Hamilton and I are playing, and a lot of the members of the panel, they're all leadership roles in the department, and they're designed to be leadership roles because anything less is not going to be successful in making the necessary changes. But if you're going to take on a leadership role, you need to have skills that are relevant to the job. So you need to be able to motivate colleagues. You need to be able to ensure that the meetings you're having, like our diversity committees, are run in an inclusive manner, so that everybody's voice is heard. And you need to be able to delegate. This is a big job, and you can't do it all yourself. So leadership skills are a big part of it. And I think one of the things I didn't realize going into this job a few years ago when I took it is the role of public speaking, and how much more out front I am and giving presentations and a lot of communication with the department. I end up emailing the department regularly, and you really have to craft your message to make sure that you hit the right notes with what you're trying to say, and motivate people to come along with you on this journey toward being more equitable in the department.
Yeah, I really want to key off of what Andrew said. I mean, I think that communication skills are critical in this space. It is not typically the case that one has to motivate or explain to a department the clinical mission of the department, or for most departments, the research mission of the department, or the educational mission of the department. However, despite its centrality to practically everything that happens in medicine and in our interaction with patients and each other, it is nonetheless a core part of the mission of the diversity officer to be able to translate the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion related topics to colleagues. And that an important piece of that is the ability to build allies, because there's no way in which you could possibly engage in this endeavor alone. I think most of us have other activities that we're engaged in as physicians, researchers, and educators, and we were probably all very busy doing those things before we also took on the role of diversity officer, right? And so you have to have allies because you don't have the bandwidth, right, to really carry this job by yourself. And also, as diversity officers, we have to recognize that the more diversity of thought we bring into the space, right, the better the ideas and the better the product, right? And so we really have to build teams. And so that kind of emotional intelligence of being able to sort of interact with people, engage them, hear what they're saying, speak to their needs, and sort of meet them where they live and build teams around our mission, it's really essential. We'll talk about this a little bit more as we move on, but I think, in terms of what allies we need to build teams within our departments, right? Including the leadership of our departments and the engagement of our departments, and then sort of build out from there to other colleagues and allies in other spaces, to avoid sort of reinventing the wheel and sort of greater engagement with our institution. So and those are sort of the communication skills that are required.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And can we be a bit more concrete as to what type of resources would you say are needed to do this job well?
Yeah. So I think a sort of central theme, if I think about what the resources are that are required, are that you want the kind of resources that allow you to be an influencer rather than a token in your department. Not something that your department has just so that it can say that it has a diversity officer, right? You want to be able to be a change maker. So one of the things that I think is relevant for at least, I would say for many individuals in this space, would be to have some form of title. And I'm not saying that as a kind of checkbox, as everybody likes to have accolades and kudos. The reason why I think it's important is at least twofold. The first is that we've already heard this notion of a diversity tax. It turns out that most individuals who are diversity officers, for better or for worse, are individuals who are from underrepresented, underserved, or marginalized communities themselves. Right. And so this notion of a diversity tax, that these individuals are often called upon to do more service for their institutions, often serving the diversity mission of their institutions. And often that work goes very much under-recognized as meritorious work for the purposes of things like promotion or further career advancement, right? And so for that reason, a title is important because it's a symbol of the relevance of the role and its contribution to the mission of your institution, right? And its value. And so it's not just a kudos for you, but really it signals the relevance of the role in a way that other people can understand. And also gives you, depending on what the level at which that title is represented, the ability or the latitude to be in leadership spaces, right? And that's important, right? Because of the things that you've heard our other speakers talk about, where all the roles and ways in which a diversity officer needs to have influence. It's very important for a diversity officer to be in, you know, to quote Hamilton, ironically enough, to be in the room where it happens, right? So you can't influence things unless you're in that space as a leader. And certainly there are other things that, you know, would be necessary in order to pursue the role, administrative support. It's as I said, we're all busy, so some protection of the time it takes, you know, things like this, and the sort of financial support to also pursue your initiatives.
Thank you very much. And for our next question, what kind of access do you need inside and outside of your department to be successful?
So the number one thing that you need to be successful is the backing of your chair. And we really don't have any authority that doesn't come from our chairs. And if you have a chair who's not backing you up and not going to support your endeavors, then it's really hard to get anything done. So for me, I have a monthly standing meeting with my chair. We meet each month and we talk over all the different diversity, equity, and inclusion programs we've got going, ideas for the future. We talk about recruitment, we talk about retention, and this is done on a monthly basis. And if you don't have that kind of relationship with your chair, you might be floundering and trying to get things done. But again, you know, it is about being in the room, and one of the rooms you need to be in is the room with your chair, because I think that that access is critical to getting anything done. But at the same time, you don't necessarily need the chair looking over your shoulder with everything you do. And so the best relationship is one where you're given the latitude to explore different ideas and to try different programs and projects, and to do that, you need your budget, right? So you don't want to have to go to the chair every time you need $100 for this or $200 for that. If I want to bring in a speaker, I want to be able to have a budget where I can hire a speaker to come in and not need permission for everything we do. So it's a delicate balance between knowing your chair supports you, having the ear of your chair, but also having the autonomy and the freedom to implement changes, knowing that your chair is backing you up, even if you haven't discussed every detail.
Fantastic. And for our last question before we open up to the Q&A, can I ask, what kind of knowledge do you need to be successful in this role?
Well, I think some of our speakers have already touched on the importance of understanding the historical and social contexts that underlie a lot of the obstacles and barriers that face individuals from marginalized groups and from a variety of different backgrounds that as a diversity officer you would be supporting, right? And I would say that in addition to having a general grounding in that, understanding how that impacts the field of medicine and how it impacts the field of neurology, how factors like structural racism, for instance, are present not just out there somewhere, but in medicine itself. And we've recently seen how that is not necessarily well understood by the physician workforce, even amongst leaders in medicine. There was sort of recently a very sort of public display in which leaders in medicine demonstrated their sort of lack of familiarity with the impact of structural racism on medicine and on the attitudes and behaviors of physicians, right? So we have to be knowledgeable in those spaces. But we also have to have a pretty concrete understanding of what the obstacles and barriers are that face not just our patients when they're trying to get equitable care, but also our workforce, when individuals from a variety of different backgrounds are trying to seek advancement and try to develop their careers. What kinds of things are they up against, including a difference, like sort of gaps in process knowledge, in their ability or the size of their networks, and in gaps in mentorship, the diversity tax that we've already spoken of, the implicit or explicit bias of colleagues and people who can influence their careers, things like that. And insofar as the diversity officer also ends up being a person who really pushes for the advancement of individuals from a variety of backgrounds that are historically underrepresented in their field, they also have to have a functioning understanding of the mechanics of how that works. So for example, if you're often the diversity officer is involved in things like hiring and promotions. So you have to have a pretty solid understanding of how that process works in order to be able to exert influence to make sure that those processes are happening in an equitable manner and that individuals are not facing undue barriers as they try to build their careers in our field. And I think that an important piece of this is, for a lot of the skills, these and plus some of the other skills that we talked about, the leadership communication skills, I think that it's actually important to have training and mentorship to some extent from experienced diversity officers, and I have to say that when I started this several years ago, in my department at least, that would have been a difficult statement to make because there weren't as many, but now I'm very excited by this group and the curriculum we're putting out and the obviously the size of the audience right there. There is a growing sort of cohort of individuals who can share best practices and approaches to doing this job really excellently, and leadership opportunities to develop like the Diversity Leadership Program, which it turns out that all of us are graduates of, right? That those are great opportunities to build the kind of skill sets that will be important for this kind of role.
And so I want to follow up on that, because one of the points we're trying to make with having this type of webinar is to show that this isn't a job that you just throw someone into, right? There's training involved, there's skills involved, there's knowledge involved. And we want the academic department leadership to understand that. And that's why it deserves recognition. That's why it deserves a title. That's why it deserves your time and budget to support the people doing the job. And so that you can go out and get training. If you don't have training at your institution, there are entities around the country that will do this training that you can sign up for, and your department should be paying for you to do those trainings to get the skill set, because it's not really something that is just a natural job you just walk into on day one and you know what you're doing. There's a lot more to it. So that's one of our motivations for having this type of session, is to reinforce that idea.
Thank you, everyone, for all of the important, critical discussion and contributions that you have made to the field of neurology and to this webinar, and discussing with many individuals who are currently still in the training process and possibly hope to become diversity officers in their future careers as faculty members. Now I would like to, in the last 5 minutes of our webinar, allow everyone to turn their video back on, all of our panelists, so that we can field live questions in the Q&A that have been posed. Thank you to the attendees for submitting your questions there. And I think the first question that I see that is still unanswered is, what are experiences creating data, research, and outcomes measures related to DEI efforts? I think it's a great question, because as we know, many of us are academic neurologists, and often the data is helpful to promote the discussion with tangible evidence as to how the outcomes can be impactful. I'm going to look at Dr. Flippin to answer this question.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Thomas. So you have to know where you're starting. And so I can say from personal experience, we have an EDI committee that's been in existence in the medical school at UCLA for years. It took us, I don't know, 5 years to get accurate data on the actual makeup of our faculty. We were told that, oh, well, people don't self-identify. You can't have a list. You can't have a list because if you contact someone, they might be offended. It was excruciating, but we finally did get that data. And that was very helpful because then that illustrates to people that the percentage of underrepresented minority faculty members in the medical school as a whole had not changed in 20 years, which says that there's an issue. So yes, the data is important, but also reflecting back on my earlier comments, you have to set some goals, and then you have to have a scorecard, and you have to review that, and you have to set metrics that are meaningful and that are a stretch. Now, not necessarily unrealistic. You're not going to go to Mars on your first rocket launch, but you can make certain that you get out of the atmosphere and heading in the right direction. And so that's where making reasonable goals, basic strategic planning, set scorecard metrics that are going to actually stretch you and force you to make significant changes in order to reach those goals. And then you're going to be acquiring, and everyone's going to have to do this, particularly with regard to graduate medical education. And I think also undergraduate medical education, both the ACGME and the LCME have now turned their attention to issues of diversity, inclusion, and disparities of care. And so everyone will start to have these data sets that you can use to help chart your course.
I wanted to expand on that topic as well. So in my role as an associate dean at the School of Medicine for Diversity in Medical Education, we set certain goals and deliverables. So some of them might be attendance at LMSA conference, SNMA conference, and the engagement itself of future medical grads is a metric that is a deliverable and an outcome that can be measured and quantitatively. And what I have seen and noticed in the virtual environment, Dr. Flippen mentioned LMSA that recently occurred. We also host a conference for pre-medical students. Attendance in this virtual environment has skyrocketed. And it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful opportunity for leveling the playing field for access through virtual conference platforms. So I just wanted to bring that up. And getting that actually addresses one of the questions too of how do you envision the role of residents and medical students in achieving these goals. I think it's really important to engage our trainees and that near peer mentors are incredibly effective for inspiring future members of the healthcare professions in their journey. And we have at our pre-med conference, the highlight every year after year is always hearing directly from medical students about their journey, about their personal stories, and recognizing that the path of medicine is not easy, but learning the pitfalls as well as successes from near peer mentors can make that journey much easier. So actually that brings us to the 3 o'clock hour. And I just wanted to, again, thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you to each of our panelists for sharing your wisdom, your experience as a diversity officers at each of your home environments. And we look forward to many more engagements in our future and future webinars and educational platforms. Hope to see you at the annual conference. And I think we can close it for the session. Thank you all.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you. All right.